The storm battered the farmhouse walls, turning the world outside into a blurred canvas of gray violence. Rain lashed against the glass like handfuls of gravel, while the wind howled with a voice that made the old timbers groan. 9-year-old Lily pressed her face to the cold living room window, watching the chaotic backyard. Through the sheets of water, she spotted a dark, unmoving shape near the fence line. It wasn't a rock. It wasn't a bush. It looked anchored to the earth, heavy and still. The temperature was dropping fast, turning the mud to freezing slush, yet the shape didn't move. Fear told her to look away, to retreat to the warmth of the television. But a deeper instinct held her fast. She couldn't leave it. She placed a hand against the freezing glass, making a silent promise. She had to check. The house stood silent behind her, a stark contrast to the violence raging outside. Her parents were upstairs, likely asleep or reading, oblivious to the drama unfolding in the yard. Lily felt the weight of the empty hallway pressing down on her. She was only 9, small for her age, but she possessed an observant nature that often made her feel older than she was. Tonight, the solitude of the house didn't feel peaceful. It felt like a clock ticking down. She didn't run to her parents. She knew they would tell her it was just a trash bag or a shadow. She had to be sure first. She moved to the mudroom with a tactical focus. She pulled her yellow raincoat from the hook, the plastic crinkling loudly in the quiet house. It felt like armor against the unknown. She stepped into her red rubber boots, grasping the heavy metal flashlight from the emergency shelf. The cold radiated through the back door, seeping into her bones before she even touched the handle. She took a breath, steeling herself against the dark. Opening the door was a physical struggle. The wind caught the wood, ripping it from her grip and slamming it against the siding. Instantly, the roar of the storm swallowed her. Rain hit her face like ice pellets, stinging her cheeks and blurring her vision. She stepped off the porch and sank immediately into ankle-deep mud. The sludge sucked at her boots, trying to hold her back, but she leaned into the wind, pushing forward. The beam of her flashlight cut a frantic path through the rain, illuminating the yard in brief, jerky flashes. The old oak tree looked like a skeleton. The swing set looked like a gallows, but she kept her eyes locked on the fence line. The wind pushed against her chest, a physical barrier demanding she turn back. Every instinct of self-preservation told her to run inside, but the image of that still shape pulled her onward. She reached the perimeter, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She aimed the light downward. The beam swept over wet grass and tangled weeds before landing on the source of the shadow. It was a dog. He was a large, matted heap of black fur, curled into a tight ball in the mud. He wasn't just resting, he was trapped. A heavy, rusted chain pulled taut from his neck to a metal stake driven deep into the ground, leaving him no room to move, no way to find shelter. He was completely exposed to the freezing deluge. He looked like part of the earth, resigned to let the mud claim him. Lily stopped breathing. The sight didn't make her scream. It didn't make her run. Instead, a profound ache bloomed in her chest, hot and sharp. He looked so defeated. The rainwater ran in rivets over his visible ribs, and his fur was plastered to his skin. He was shivering so violently that it shook the chain, a metallic rattle that was lost in the wind. She took a hesitant step closer, the mud squelching. The dog's head snapped up. The movement was slow, heavy with exhaustion. The flashlight beam caught his face, revealing a graying muzzle and a scar running down his snout. But it was his eyes that froze her in place. They weren't angry, they weren't wild. They were amber pools of absolute sorrow. He didn't growl. He didn't bare his teeth at the intruder. He simply looked at her, blinking against the harsh light and the rain, with an expression of heartbreaking confusion. In that gaze, Lily saw no monster. She saw a soul that had given up, waiting for the end in the cold dark. "You're okay," Lily whispered, though she knew he couldn't hear her. The wind tore the words from her mouth the moment she spoke them, scattering them into the dark, wet night. But she didn't stop talking. She kept a steady stream of soft, rhythmic sounds flowing, a lifeline of calm thrown into the chaos of the storm. She lowered her body, sinking her knees directly into the freezing slush without a second thought for her clean jeans or the cold that instantly bit through the fabric. She needed to be smaller. She needed to be on his level. The dog watched her descent with a rigid intensity. As she reached out a hand, palm open and trembling slightly from the cold, a low rumble vibrated in his chest. It wasn't the sharp, aggressive bark of a guard dog protecting his territory. It was a deep, guttural sound of pure misery, a warning that he was in pain and didn't believe anyone could offer him anything else. Lily froze. The flashlight beam wavered in her grip. Instinct told her to pull back, to protect her fingers, but empathy held her ground. She understood what that sound meant. It wasn't a threat, it was a boundary drawn by suffering. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, her voice dropping to a hum. She waited. The rain plastered her hair to her forehead, water dripping from her nose, but she didn't wipe it away. She let him dictate the pace. Slowly, painfully, the dog stretched his neck forward. He didn't look at her face, he focused on the hand. His nose, cold and wet, brushed against her fingers. He inhaled deeply, taking in the scent of soap and rain and innocent intent. The growl died in his throat, replaced by a heavy, shuddering exhale that sounded like a surrender. Lily moved. She didn't reach for his head to pet him. She reached for the metal at his neck. The chain was heavy, cold iron that had likely been sapping his body heat for hours. The clip was a rusted nightmare of industrial steel, caked in mud and grit. Her fingers, already numb and clumsy from the freezing rain, struggled to find purchase on the mechanism. She pushed against the latch, but it was seized tight. "Come on," she gritted out, frustration rising. The dog remained perfectly still, as if he sensed that his fate hung on this small, terrifying struggle between a little girl's fingers and a piece of rusted metal. Lily dropped the flashlight into the mud, plunging them into semi-darkness so she could use both hands. She dug her fingernails into the catch, leveraging all her small strength against the corrosion. She felt skin tear, a sharp sting on her thumb, but she didn't let go. With a sudden grating snap, the mechanism gave way. The chain fell into the mud with a dull thud. The dog didn't move immediately. He had been tethered for so long that the absence of the weight likely felt like a trick. "Up," Lily commanded gently, sliding her arms under his chest. "We have to go." He tried. His back legs scrabbled uselessly in the slick mud, sliding out from under him. He was weaker than she had realized, his muscles wasted and stiff from the cold. He collapsed back down with a splash, closing his eyes. He was too heavy to carry, but Lily refused to accept the physics of the situation. She hooked her arm around his torso, pulling upward, using her own body as a crutch for him. "You are not staying here," she told him fiercely. Driven by her urgency, or perhaps shamed by her effort, the dog tried again. He locked his front legs, trembling violently, and pushed himself up. He leaned his entire weight against her side, a wet, shivering mountain of fur. Lily staggered under the load, but planted her feet wide. They began the march back. It was a slow, grueling pilgrimage. Every step was a battle against the suction of the mud and the force of the wind. Lily shielded his head with her shoulder, taking the brunt of the freezing rain. They moved as a single, awkward entity, girl and beast, stumbling through the dark. The distance to the ports was only 50 feet, but it felt like miles. Twice he stumbled, nearly taking her down with him, and twice she caught him, grunting with the effort, whispering promises of warmth and dryness. When they finally reached the wooden steps, Lily had to lift his front paws one by one, guiding him up like a toddler. They collapsed through the back door together, spilling onto the linoleum floor of the mudroom. Lily kicked the door shut behind them, throwing the deadbolt. The silence was instantaneous and shocking. The roar of the wind was cut off, replaced by the heavy, ragged sound of their breathing. The warmth of the house wrapped around them, thick and startling after the biting cold. Lily sat back on her heels, gasping for air, water pooling around her knees. She looked at the floor. A dark, spreading lake of muddy water, dead leaves, and filth was expanding rapidly across the pristine white tiles, oozing from the dog's matted coat and her own ruined clothes. The reality of what she had done crashed into her. She had brought a wild, dirty, possibly dangerous creature into her parents' immaculate home. But as the dog lifted his head and looked at her, really looked at her, without the barrier of the rain, she knew she didn't care about the floor. She had crossed a line in the storm, and there was no going back. Lily didn't waste a second on the mess. She scrambled to the laundry cupboard, pulling out armfuls of old beach towels, the scratchy, faded ones her mother kept for car washes and spills. She dropped to her knees beside the shivering heap of fur, the cold of the tiles seeping through her jeans. The dog didn't flinch as she draped the first towel over his back. He was too exhausted to fight, too numb to care. She rubbed him vigorously, her small hands working in circles to generate heat, trying to scrub the cold out of his bones. The white terry cloth turned brown instantly, heavy with the grime of his imprisonment and the stench of the swamp. As the layers of mud began to peel away, the truth of his condition emerged, stark and horrifying. He wasn't just thin, he was skeletal. His ribs felt like a washboard under her fingers, sharp ridges of bone with no padding to protect them. And there were scars. Old, silver lines crisscrossed his flanks and vanished into the thick fur of his neck, telling a story of a life that had been hard long before the storm arrived. One particularly jagged mark ran down his shoulder, a testament to some past violence. Lily's throat tightened. She worked around the injury with extreme care, treating it like holy ground. Then he moved. Not to run, not to snap. He shifted his weight and leaned his entire heavy head against her chest. It was a collapse, a total release of tension. He pressed his cold, wet forehead into the hollow of her neck and let out a long, trembling sigh. The weight of him was substantial, anchoring her to the floor. In that moment, the dynamic shifted. She wasn't just a girl cleaning a dog, she was his pillar. He was trusting her to hold him up because he no longer could stand on his own. But the house was waking up. The floorboards above creaked, her father shifting in his sleep. Panic spiked in her chest. If they found him now, looking like a swamp monster, they would put him in the garage or call animal control. She needed him quiet. She needed him fed. She crept into the kitchen, her socks sliding on the linoleum. The refrigerator light seemed blindingly bright as she opened the door. She bypassed the milk and the cheese, her eyes landing on the foil-wrapped package on the middle shelf. The Sunday roast. Her mother had been saving it for sandwiches, but Lily didn't hesitate. She grabbed the cold beef, tearing off a generous chunk with her bare hands. Back in the mudroom, she offered the meat on her flat palm. A starving animal should have snapped at it, taken fingers and all in a desperate bid for sustenance. But this dog, he sniffed it delicately. He took the beef with a softness that broke her heart, his teeth barely grazing her skin as if he knew she was fragile. He chewed slowly, savoring the flavor, his eyes never leaving hers. It was a gentleman's grace in a beggar's body. "You're safe now," she whispered, the words feeling inadequate against the magnitude of his hunger. "I'm going to call you Bear." He didn't look like a bear right now. He looked like a ghost. But the name felt right. It was heavy, solid. It was a promise that he would get big and strong again. He would not be a victim. He would be a bear. The dog licked a drop of gravy from her thumb, accepting the title. The storm raged on outside, but the mudroom had become a fortress. Lily knew she couldn't go back upstairs to her soft, warm bed. Leaving him alone in the dark felt like a betrayal. He might think she wasn't coming back. He might think the warmth was temporary. She pulled the remaining dry towels onto the rug, creating a makeshift nest. She turned off the overhead light, plunging the room into a soft gray gloom illuminated only by the street lamp filtering through the high window. She lay down on the hard floor, curling her body around his back, spooning his warmth. She ignored the discomfort of the rug against her cheek. He stiffened for a second, surprised by the contact, and then relaxed completely. The violent shivering that had racked his body for the last hour began to subside. His breathing, previously shallow and ragged, deepened. It slowed down, finding a rhythm. In, out, in, out. Lily matched her breath to his. In the quiet dark, with the smell of wet fur and earth filling her nose, she felt a profound sense of peace. They were conspirators now, guarding the secret sanctuary of the mudroom against a world that had left him to die. The peace of the mudroom was a fragile illusion that shattered somewhere around 3 a.m. Lily woke not to a sound, but to a temperature change. The air in the small room had grown heavy and stifling, smelling faintly of wet wool and sickness. She shifted on the rug, her arm brushing against Bear's flank. It was like touching a radiator. The damp cold that had plagued him hours ago had vanished, replaced by a terrifying dry heat that radiated through his fur. Lily sat up, blinking in the darkness, her heart starting a slow, heavy thud against her ribs. She fumbled for the flashlight, clicking it on with trembling fingers. The beam revealed a changed animal. Bear wasn't sleeping peacefully anymore. He was sprawled on his side, legs rigid, his chest heaving with shallow, rapid breaths that whistled in his throat. His eyes were half open, rolling back to show the whites, seeing nothing but his own internal delirium. "Bear?" she whispered, her voice cracking. She laid her hand on his head. It was burning. The fever had spiked with a vengeance, the body's violent reaction to infection and exposure now that the immediate threat of freezing was gone. He didn't lean into her touch this time. He didn't even acknowledge she was there. He was drifting away, pulled down by a tide she couldn't fight with towels and roast beef. Panic, cold and sharp, washed over her. For the last few hours, she had felt like a hero. She had been the rescuer, the provider, the guardian. Now, she felt exactly like what she was, a 9-year-old girl with no resources and no knowledge, watching a life fade away on a dirty rug. The towels weren't enough. The love wasn't enough. He was dying, right here in the safety she had promised him. She pulled her knees to her chest, rocking slightly. The dilemma that formed in her mind was absolute and terrifying. If she stayed quiet, if she kept her secret until morning, he might not wake up. The heat coming off him was unnatural. It was a fire consuming him from the inside out. But if she woke her parents, her imagination, fueled by fear, painted the worst-case scenarios in vivid detail. Her father was a practical man. He saw logic, not stories. He would see a stray dog ridden with disease, a danger to their household. He might call the pound. He might say there was nothing to be done. He might be angry that she had brought a wild animal into the house while they slept. The fear of their disapproval, of the inevitable no, paralyzed her. Then Bear made a sound. It wasn't a growl or a bark. It was a high, thin whine, a sound of such pure, defenseless distress that it cut through the silence of the house like a knife. He kicked his back leg, running from some phantom in his fever dream, and let out a sharp breath of pain. That sound shattered her hesitation. The fear of getting in trouble, the fear of her father's stern voice, the fear of being grounded, it all evaporated. It became trivial. This living, breathing creature was suffering, and her silence was an accomplice to that suffering. If saving him meant facing her father's anger, she would take the anger. She would take the punishment. She couldn't let him burn up in the dark. She scrambled to her feet, her limbs stiff from the hard floor. She wiped the tears from her cheeks with the back of her hand, steeling herself. She needed to be brave. Not just for herself, but for Bear. She turned toward the door that led to the kitchen and the stairs beyond, ready to march up and wake the house, ready to scream if she had to. She never made it to the handle. The kitchen door swung open. The overhead light flickered on, flooding the mudroom with a blinding, sterile brilliance that made Lily squint and cover her eyes. The sudden illumination stripped away the shadows and the secrets, leaving everything exposed. The muddy footprints, the ruined towels, the dying dog, and the guilt written plainly on her face. Her father stood in the doorway. He was wearing his plaid robe, his hair mussed from sleep, a glass of water in his hand. He looked enormous in the small frame of the door, a towering figure of authority. He blinked, his eyes adjusting to the scene before him, moving from his daughter's tear-streaked face to the massive, heaving black shape on the floor. The glass of water stopped halfway to his mouth. The silence that stretched between them was heavier than the storm, charged with the static of a secret revealed too soon. "Lily?" he said, his voice rough with sleep and confusion. "What on earth?" He took a step forward, and the spell broke. The secret sanctuary was breached. The fever had broken the quiet, and now the light had broken the hiding place. There was no more time for plans. There was only the truth, shivering on the floor between them. Her father's reaction was visceral. He didn't see the soul Lily had connected with. He saw a biological hazard. He saw a stray, mangy animal that had dragged filth into his home and was currently breathing sickness onto his daughter. His face hardened, the sleep vanishing instantly, replaced by the sharp, adrenaline-fueled clarity of a parent perceiving a threat. "Lily, get away from it," he commanded, his voice tight. He didn't yell, which was almost worse. He used the tone reserved for dangerous situations, for broken glass or busy streets. "Right now, move." He stepped into the room, closing the distance in 2 long strides. His hand reached out, not to strike, but to pull her to safety, to snatch her away from the dirty, heaving creature on the rug. To him, the dog was a variable that needed to be removed. He was already calculating the logistics. Grab the child, isolate the animal, call the authorities. It was a logical, protective response. But he hadn't been there in the storm. He hadn't felt the dog's head rest against his chest or heard that surrender of a sigh. He didn't understand that the equation had changed. Lily didn't obey. For the first time in her life, her father's command didn't trigger immediate compliance. Instead, it triggered a defensive instinct so fierce it surprised them both. She didn't retreat, she lunged. She threw her small body across the dog's flank, spreading her arms wide to cover as much of him as possible. She became a human shield, placing herself directly between the looming figure of her father and the defenseless animal. "No!" she screamed, the word tearing out of her throat. It wasn't a tantrum, it was a battle cry. "Don't touch him!" Her father froze, his hand hovering in the air. He looked at his daughter, usually so quiet, so well-behaved, and saw a stranger. Her eyes were wild, her face streaked with mud and tears, her jaw set with a terrifying determination. She looked like a cornered animal herself. "Lily, be reasonable," he started, his voice softening slightly, trying to de-escalate. "That dog is sick. He could be dangerous. You don't know where he came from." "I do know," she sobbed, pressing her cheek against the dog's burning fur. Bear didn't move. He was too far gone to register the conflict, his breathing hitching in painful gasps. "He came from the rain. He was dying, and I saved him. You can't take him away." Her father took a breath, his patience fraying at the edges. "Honey, we can't keep a wild dog. He's not wild," Lily cut him off, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. She looked up at her father, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that stopped him cold. "He trusts me. He is my best friend now." The words hung in the air, absolute and heavy. Best friend. It was a title usually reserved for schoolmates or childhood companions, earned over years of shared secrets and play. But Lily had compressed a lifetime of bonding into 3 hours on a cold floor. She had saved his life, and in turn, he had given her his trust. That bond was now the most important thing in her world. "What is going on down here?" Her mother's voice drifted from the doorway, softer than the father's, but laced with worry. She stood wrapped in a robe, taking in the scene, the mud, the standoff, the desperate tableau on the rug. She didn't look at the mess on the floor. She looked at the dog. She walked past her husband, ignoring his warning gesture, and knelt on the other side of the rug. She was a nurse. Her eyes didn't see a monster. They saw the protruding ribs, the jagged scars that spoke of long-term abuse, and the tremors of a high fever. She reached out, placing a professional hand on the dog's neck to check his pulse. "He's burning up, David," she said quietly, looking up at her husband. Her voice wasn't angry, it was sad. "Look at his neck. Look at the scars. Someone hurt him." "We can't keep him, Sarah," the father said, though the conviction was leaking out of his voice. "We don't know if he's vaccinated. We don't know anything." "I'm not talking about keeping him," the mother said firmly, her hand stroking the dog's ear. "I'm talking about saving him. We can't leave him like this, not tonight." She looked at Lily, seeing the terror in her daughter's eyes. "We are going to the emergency vet, now. Go get the car keys." The father looked at the 2 women in his life, one fierce, one compassionate, and realized he had lost the argument before it began. He let out a long sigh, running a hand through his hair. "Okay," he said. "Okay, wrap him up." The drive to the clinic was a blur of tension and rain. The storm had lessened, but not broken. Lily sat in the back seat, the heavy towel-wrapped bundle of Bear's head resting on her lap. Her father drove with white-knuckled focus, the wipers slapping a frantic rhythm against the windshield. No one spoke. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was thick with the unspoken fear that they might be too late. Every time the car hit a bump, Bear whimpered, a sound that made Lily's heart stop. She whispered to him constantly, a stream of promises in the dark car, telling him to hold on, telling him that best friends didn't leave each other, not ever. The veterinary clinic was a jarring shift from the chaotic darkness of the storm. It was a world of aggressive fluorescent light and the sharp chemical smell of antiseptic that stung Lily's nose. She sat on a hard plastic chair in the waiting room, still wearing her mud-caked raincoat, looking like a shipwreck survivor in a sterile laboratory. Her parents sat on either side of her, silent sentinels. The clock on the wall ticked with agonizing slowness, each second stretching out like a rubber band about to snap. They waited for news of death or life, the silence only broken by the occasional ring of a telephone or the whine of another animal. When the vet finally emerged, she didn't look at the adults. She looked straight at the small girl with the terrified eyes. "He's going to make it," she said softly. Lily let out a breath she felt she'd been holding since she first saw the shadow in the yard. But the relief came with a heavy dose of reality. The vet led them into a small consultation room and explained the damage. It wasn't just the exposure. The scars on his neck were from a collar that had been embedded for months. His teeth were worn down from chewing on metal chains. He was severely malnourished and dehydrated. Bear hadn't just been lost. He had been discarded like trash. As the vet spoke, outlining the cruelty this creature had endured, Lily saw her father's jaw tighten. The practical man who saw a health hazard was gone. In his place was a father horrified that such things happened in his world. He looked at his hands, perhaps ashamed of his earlier hesitation. They were allowed back to the recovery kennel to see him. Bear was lying on a thick blanket, an IV line taped to his shaved foreleg. He looked smaller without the mud, frail and broken. But the moment Lily stepped into the doorway, the change was instantaneous. His tail gave a weak, rhythmic thump-thump against the bedding. He didn't look at the food bowl. He didn't look at the doctors. His amber eyes locked onto Lily, and he let out a soft whine of recognition. Lily walked to the cage, ignoring the nurse's caution, and pressed her hand through the bars. Bear pressed his nose against her palm, closing his eyes in pure relief. Her parents stood in the doorway, watching the scene unfold. They saw the way the dog's breathing synced with their daughter's. They saw a bond that defied the logic of a few hours. Her mother reached out and took her husband's hand, squeezing it hard. "We'll take him home," her father said, his voice rough. "Just for foster care, just until he's strong enough to be adopted." It was a lie they told themselves to be sensible, a way to delay the inevitable attachment. But the foster period was a losing battle from day one. Over the next week, the farmhouse transformed. The mudroom became a recovery ward. High-calorie meals were prepared with more care than their own dinners. And Bear changed. As the fever faded and the ribs filled out, the ghost vanished. In his place emerged a gentle giant. He learned the sound of her school bus, pacing the hallway until she walked through the door. He followed Lily everywhere, a silent black shadow that moved only when she moved. He waited outside the bathroom door. He slept at the foot of her bed. He wasn't just a pet. He was a guardian who had chosen his person. The final surrender came 10 days later. Lily walked into the living room to find her father sitting on the floor, scratching Bear behind the ears. "He needs a proper collar," her father muttered, not looking up. "The foster agency doesn't need to know yet," but they all knew. Bear wasn't going anywhere. Weeks later, Lily sat on the porch steps, Bear resting his heavy head on her knee. A gentle rain fell, washing the world clean, but neither of them flinched. The fear was gone, replaced by an unbreakable tether between girl and guardian. They had saved each other in the dark. If you believe every dog deserves a best friend, like this video and subscribe for more stories of hope.